Good afternoon. This is Susan Sierra with Stratus Admissions Counseling. I am here today with my colleague, Harold Szymanski, and we are going to be talking about get admitted to a top 10 MBA program, your own. We would like to thank Beat the GMAT for hosting us for this webinar today. As we wait for some stragglers to join, I want to ask some poll questions to get a sense of who's with us today so we can customize what we talk about to meet kind of your needs. This webinar is intended for you to learn, so the more we know about you, the better we can do. So the first question is, where in the world are you located? I am in the U.S., east of the Mississippi, as is Harold. It's a beautiful sunny day here in North Carolina, about 60 degrees and pretty much clear blue skies. So we've got people voted. I think everyone's voted. We've got about 20% in the U.S., east of the Mississippi, 10% west of the Mississippi in the U.S., and the remaining equally divided between Asia and EMEA. So thank you for answering that. Next question. When do you intend to start an MBA? There may be some of you who are thinking you're starting later this year. Most of the round 3 deadlines have already passed, but hopefully, folks are thinking out in the future, getting ready to submit some applications this fall in anticipation of starting a program in the summer of 2019. So we've got many votes in here. Primarily, we're at about 85, 90% are looking to start in 2019, and the remaining 10, 15% are not sure yet. So I'm glad you're starting early to think about this. This is a process that should take you months. This is a major decision in your life, major financial impact in terms of lost wages to go to school, as well as the cost of attendance, with the expectation that coming out of an MBA program, you will increase your salary. So good to be thinking about this. A couple more questions here. Have you taken the GMAT or the GRE yet? At this point, almost all of the top MBA programs are test agnostic, meaning they don't care whether you submit a GMAT or a GRE. They just want to have that piece of information to help them assess your readiness and preparedness for the rigor of their program. We've got most of the votes in here, about a little over 50% say yes, but they plan to retake. About 35% say no, but they have a date scheduled and are preparing and confident. And then I would fit into this final category of the last 10% of no, do I have to take it? Yes, you do have to take it for a full-time program. If you're considering flexible format programs, there are a lot that will waive a GMAT or GRE. So something to keep in mind, because perhaps your top 10 list includes some programs that are not a full-time 2-year program. Let me close that out, and I'm going to ask a few more questions after we do introductions, because we've got a fair amount of our people here. Again, thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about get admitted to a top MBA program, your own. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Harold Szymanski, who's going to introduce himself and then come back to me.
Hey, Susan, thank you very much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. As you can see from this slide here, you get a sense of my background. Went to MIT, went to Bain & Company for a couple of years, but mainly I've been an entrepreneur really across the board. I even now spend some time dabbling in a few businesses here and there, as well as consulting to a private equity firm. In some ways, I don't love this slide, and I'll tell you why. This implies that if you work with Stratus, you're either just working with me or working with Susan. The reality is much different. We are a team. When you sign up with Stratus, it's likely you're going to be touched or involved with probably 3 or 4 other counselors, each with our own slightly different takes on things, different pieces of expertise. No matter who you work with, I'll certainly be seeing some of your MIT applications or essays. Susan will see certainly, your Duke, your Tuck. We have other people. Jennifer may see HBS, Rachma may see GSB. The reality for us is that we are a team. And again, you're going to have about 4 or 5 people are going to be involved to making sure that you produce the best application you can. And with that in mind, let me pass it back to Susan for her own introduction.
So my name, again, is Susan Sura. I am the Director of MBA Admissions Counseling here at Stratus. I did my undergrad at Dartmouth College, studied economics and computer science. I worked in consulting for a couple of years before getting my MBA. I then made a pivot and worked in high-tech product management, specifically around software and internet services. Just to date myself, this was back in the early to mid 90s where, spreadsheets were super cool. Where there was not software as a service and all the great technology that's out there today, but product management remains the same in many ways. After about a decade of working in some startups, first 10 employees in a startup, another one that went public during my time, I took a break to focus on family and relocated from the crazy hub of Boston to North Carolina, where I got involved with the admissions committee at Duke, where I spent about a decade reading applications. And it was during this time in reading thousands of applications that I realized that there were candidates who I knew in my heart were so much stronger than they presented themselves on paper. But I could only evaluate them based on what they shared. And it's for that reason that I came to work for Stratus. And now I get great satisfaction with helping Stratus clients to understand what's expected of them and to navigate the admissions process from the very beginning of understanding what their goals are through to putting together their narrative to even the exciting part at this time of year of negotiating scholarships, making decisions across multiple offers. It's a really exciting time. And as Harold said, we are a team. A little bit about Stratus. We have been around for more than a decade, and every year we work with hundreds of candidates and have acceptances at every top school every year. And as Harold noted with respect to the team, when an email comes in from a client saying they were accepted somewhere, it very quickly flutters through our entire team of people who have, read this particular client's essays or helped prep that individual for their interviews. And everyone is so excited for the success of our clients. We do use, as Harold noted, a team-based approach. So you are paired with one counselor who works with you as your day-to-day point of contact through the hopefully 6 months or more that you're working with us. And at key points in the process, we bring in a strategist who is an extra set of well-qualified eyes to put a different perspective on what you're working on. And we have, across our team, representation from nearly all of the top 20 programs. So we're able to offer what we refer to as school-specific reviews. So if you're working, say, with Harold on your applications, and Harold went to MIT, and I'm helping out as your strategist, and I went to Duke, and you're applying to Columbia and Wharton and Booth and Kellogg, those 4 sets of essays will go to 4 entirely different members of our team who will read them as if they are admissions committee and provide school-specific feedback with respect to content and tone to ensure that when you're talking about Wharton, you are talking about leadership and teamwork and the things that are important to Wharton. So we also offer something that's very unique in the industry, and that's a 4-school guarantee. We very much believe in the process and methodology that we use with our clients. And if you work with us on a comprehensive package for 4 or more schools, and you are not accepted to any of them, we will work with you again in the following round or in the following year for no incremental cost to you. And we have people who use this every year. Maybe they shot high this year, they didn't quite have the GMAT they were hoping for, and they come back to us next year better and stronger and end up getting into a great program. With that, we're going to jump into kind of the depth of our presentation here, but I want to ask a couple more questions. We've had a few more people join us. How many years of work experience do you have? These kind of determine to a certain extent, how competitive you might be in a business school class. As you likely know, at the top probably 20 programs, the average years of work experience is roughly 4 to 5 years. with the 80% range being 3 years to 8 years. So if you are outside of that 80% range, either on the low end or the high end, you're going to need to present a really compelling reason as to why now is the right time for you to be getting an MBA. Is that specifically for full-time programs? But again, today we're going to talk about perhaps alternatives beyond the top 10 rankings of full-time programs. So most of the votes are in here. We've got about 15% at less than 3 years, about 30% at 3 to 4 years, about 20% at 5 to 6 years, and the remainder, which is a lot of you, about 40%, have more than 6 years of experience. Let me close this poll up. I'm going to ask another kind of important question. Are you a reapplicant? We work with a lot of reapplicants every year. And I want to just make sure that we touch on that as necessary. And we've got mostly no's, lots of votes coming in, all new, fresh faces here. So we won't talk very much about reapplicants. And hopefully you guys will, if you do it right the first time, hopefully it's only one time. We do have a lot of people who have come to us, after having applied on their own once or twice, and then are successful with us. And they often note, man, I wish I had just come to you guys earlier on. So, we have no reapplicants right now, so I'll close that out. And with that, trade it back to Harold to talk about things to consider when putting together, your list of schools you might apply to.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. Well, everyone always knows the media rankings, who's number 1, who's number 5, who's number 10. And obviously, these are relevant, no question about it. And it's important to remember these media rankings are really based on objective criteria. Things like average test scores, average GPA, career placement, starting salary. Again, they're really crunching through a number of different numbers. However, there are pieces of that are either not relevant to you, or in some ways, these rankings just aren't accurate for you based on what your goals are, what you really want to do, including your experience to date. Well, many schools look at older candidates one way and younger candidates another way. And in fact, there is a difference school to school. So it's important to know that when you're choosing which schools to apply to. Similarly, around your learning requirements, do you best learn through an experiential type of situation, or are you more interested in your classic lecture, or are you more turned on and excited about what's called the case method? And each school, again, has a different mix of all these things. There are a couple of schools that are 100% case method, like Harvard Business School and University of Virginia. And most schools, though, have some sort of mix. So it's a sense of your understanding what type of teaching they do and how receptive you are to that. And finally, there's this whole issue around personal values and preferences. For example, does a school like Tuck make it onto your list, even though it's a top 5 ranked school, if you hate living out in the woods? And I'm being facetious here, but that's frequently the case. Does a school make it onto your list if it's in a place that you can never see yourself living or being comfortable? So when we think about creating a top 10 list, yes, you use the media top 10 list, but it's very important you put it through the lens of your own goals, experiences, learning requirements, values, to figure out, okay, what are really the top 10 schools, the 10 schools that you want to go to? And that's what this presentation is all about, helping you understand how to weigh these different schools based on what's important to you. So we frequently talk about the 6 C's, and that's a way of putting a construct around how to think about different schools. How do they make it onto your list? So with that in mind, we go through each of them, and honestly, they are great inputs as you think about, do you want to apply to that school or don't you want to apply to that school? And a lot of it simply revolves around the question of competitiveness. Can you get in? And obviously, no sense applying to schools that you have zero chance in, unless it's a dream school. Similarly, maybe you're able to say, I know I have a really good chance at this school. Let me hold that thought as I look at other schools. Obviously, connections, you have to understand the school. You have to understand what makes it tick. You have to understand what it's like to be a student there. So it's important now to start making connections to these schools. Curriculum, for most schools, you're certainly assured a great general management education. However, some schools have things that you won't find in other schools. FinTech, for example, is taught at some schools. The world of infrastructure is taught at other schools, and you must make sure it's obvious that you go to the school that actually has a curriculum or follows the subject matter that you plan on making your future in. Clubs, and that refers to this idea here of a lot of the learning that happens on campus happens outside of the classroom. So you want to find a place where you can really push yourself to learn in a different way, a deeper way, very specific issues or industries. FinTech is, again, a great example. Columbia has a FinTech conference each year. Isn't it great to get involved with that? Maybe at that point you help bring speakers focused on FinTech to campus. Maybe at that point you help really meet the movers and shakers of this industry. Again, by being involved in this type of club, you develop an expertise in a particular industry that is better than you would find other places. Community and culture, this is all about, is this a place of your people? When you go there, is this a place where you're going to be comfortable? Is this a place where you feel like you can get most out of it because maybe you're the most relaxed there? Maybe this is a community that you really already see yourself being a part of. Again, this is important. And frequently, you only learn this when you go and you smell the air, as we like to say. And finally, cost. Money is always important for anybody. Even if you say, oh, I can fund it myself, this is a very expensive proposition, $200,000. How important is it for you to get a scholarship? That, I think, is going to be a key question. And that will impact which schools you apply to. There are some schools that actually are looking for people just like you, and whatever that means. And when I say that, that includes international students, it includes women, it includes members of underrepresented communities. But knowing how important a scholarship is to you will allow you to fine-tune that list with the thought of, maybe if I get into this school or that school, I can actually go for free. And that is something we always consider when we recommend what schools people should be applying to. And in that in mind, let's just jump right on into this idea of competitiveness. And
Let me ask one question. Let me just jump right in here. I'm going to ask one more question to give us a little more insight as we walk through of, what is important to our listeners as they consider picking their own list. And this is one where you should be able to pick more than one answer here. So a match with your experience and goals, the return on investment, location, national or global ranking, and cultural fit. Those are your options. You can pick which ones are important to you. And we'll wait a little bit here. And I'm going to transition to the next slide while I leave the poll up, I think. And we have most of the votes in, and I'm going to read it out by most of, the highest percentage of our listeners having voted on a particular thing. So about 70% of you are looking for a match with your experience and goals. About 60% are looking for that return on investment, 55% national or global rankings, about 40% location, and about 30% cultural fit. So great. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to close this out and let Harold continue talking about competitiveness.
Well, when we start talking about competitiveness, there's always the numbers, and these numbers are public, and they very much impact how schools are ranked. And those are what you would expect: how well you did on the GMAT or the GRE, how well you did on the TOEFL if you need to take it, what your undergraduate performance was, including your GPA, as well as your major. And finally, this idea of work experience: how long have you worked, and what has that experience looked like? Has it been very jumpy? In the past 5 years, have you had 5 jobs, or have you been steady at one particular job at an investment bank or at a retail or whatever it is? All of these things go into the ability of the admissions committee to weigh how competitive you are and how they look at you. Except let's pause with that. The reality of the admissions process is that that's just a starting point. The idea here of a GMAT, GPA, that there is some ultimate requirement is really wrong. Competitiveness also comes down to the quality of the work experience, other things you've maybe done outside of work, maybe leadership you have taken on, as well as just your ability to explain how you're different from everyone else, how you're unique, and why business school makes sense. And I have a good example of this in a client who right now is at Washington University in St. Louis. He got a very large scholarship to go there. And on the one hand, while he isn't, looking at it originally, the competitive, he wouldn't appear to be competitive. His GMAT was somewhat low. It was more than somewhat low. His GPA was sort of middling. He had fairly good work experience, but not at one of the high-flying companies. And the reality for him was he, at first blush, was not considered a great candidate. However, he was able to explain his story. He was able to connect with the community on campus that Olin is very much interested in and serving, and that was the military community. And based on the school's needs, as well as his ability to articulate why that school in particular was so perfect for him, led to him actually being accepted with a scholarship and really having a wonderful experience there. So while this process may start off with things like GMAT or GPA, by no means does it end there. What is really required to be a successful candidate is beyond that. What do you want to do? Why do you want to get an MBA? How are you going to be involved in all that's happening on campus? And Susan,
excellent.
I think...
Thanks, Harold. Yep, I've got a story to share. And one thing I will add is you will hear in this process the word holistic. And the evaluation process for business schools truly is holistic. As Harold noted, there is no kind of cutoff for a GMAT or a GPA. You occasionally see that Harvard admitted someone with a 550 GMAT. I'm sure there's something else in that individual's profile that completely overshadows that very soft test score. So keep that in mind. You are not just your test scores. And let me share another story. What you're going to see through this presentation these are not real people. These are stock photos, but these are real quotes that have come in an email or been posted on a review somewhere about, from a client. So this particular candidate, in terms of competitiveness, had really jumpy work experience, probably 3 jobs in 4 years, had a really soft GRE. He had transitioned colleges and had some jumpy GPA issues as well. So on paper, with the things that drive the rankings, he was not looking great. In the end, this guy has a scholarship through the consortium to a top 20 program where he will be heading next year, because he put together a great story and really connected with that school, with its community, and was able to share the contribution he will make as part of that community. So a great outcome for him. And moving forward to the next C, Harold walked through all of the C's up front. I'll transition to connections. And this is how you learn what you know about a program. So we encourage our clients, you need to start now making connections, reaching out to students who are involved with perhaps clubs that you're interested in, attending tour events in your local city, listening to webinars from the particular schools, engaging with admissions committees, depending on where you're located. If you're in a major city, there are not only tour events hosted by third parties like the MBA tour or Poets and Quants, but groups of schools frequently go and host an event together. There's a group of about 7 different top 20 schools who travel together all over the country and share resources at a venue, and you can interact with alumni and students and admissions folks. And this is really where you need to ask the questions about the curriculum, about the clubs, about the culture. And ideally, you make a visit to the school. We realize that that's not always possible, but there's no better way to learn about an MBA program than to sit in class and observe the interactions between the professor and the students and amongst the students themselves. See what happens when class ends and everyone walks out. Are they on their phones? Are they continuing the conversation that was going on in class? Do they walk together and eat lunch together, or do they all just kind of go off in their own direction? So some stories about connections. This is a client who had applied on his own to schools and came up short, and in the following year engaged Stratus as a reapplicant. And he really had his heart set on Columbia. And although he wasn't in New York, he made great efforts to engage with students, to go make visits, to continue to work the relationships he had developed with the admissions committee, so that when he went to write his essays, he could really speak to why he needed to be at the very center of business at Columbia. And he ended up getting an early decision, a dream for him that had taken, a little while to realize. And I think if he reflected back, he probably would have wished that he had started with us the previous year, so that we could have guided him a little bit through, managing those relationships and developing the connections that he needed to really understand the program. And another story, this is another client who started with us about a year and a half, actually 2 years in advance of starting a program. She'll be starting a program this fall. And she happens to live in a Midwestern city where tour events do not go through St. Louis, where she lives. But she made an effort to visit campus. She went to women's weekends at UCLA, at Berkeley, at Texas, at Duke, at Olin as well, and really, engaged with students, made connections, and learned as much as she possibly could, not only about the schools, but about the communities beyond those schools, because she has a desire to kind of set down roots. She's a little bit older candidate, and once she moves to a city, she kind of wants to stay there, I think. At the end of the day, she ended up with admits at 3 programs that she had gotten to know really well. She has, when I last talked to her 2 weeks ago, she was still deciding between 2 schools, one of which offered her 100% scholarship and a dean's fellowship, and the other offered her about 60 or 70% and a Forte fellowship. So great options for her, and a great outcome, because she was able to really connect with these schools and individuals at them and understand what role she would play and how she would contribute, not only during her 2 years in an MBA program, but beyond that as an alum. And with that, I'm going to transition back to Harold to talk about curriculum.
Thank you very much, Susan. So when it comes to curriculum, I think what you really have to understand is that involves many different pieces. Obviously, it's the courses that are taught, but that's really just one piece of it. Also, it comes down to how they teach these things. Is it, again, as we spoke earlier, is it through an experiential experience, or is it lecture? Because that also can impact how you yourself learn. As well as some schools have what are called concentration or majors, where you can really focus on something in great detail. Other schools, not so much. And the reason for that is some schools have a core curriculum that maybe lasts 1 semester, giving you a lot more choice over the last 3 semesters. And other schools have a core curriculum the whole year. So the reality is it's only by second year you start taking the courses you're most interested in. And that really impacts how people learn, the development of expertise they're able to gain at business school. And it's something to think about, really, as you plan your own career. Are you somebody who's going to really need to know one industry or one function very, very well? Or do you anticipate being a general manager and therefore have to know a little bit of something about many different things? And also, curriculum can be used as a way of gaining interest by the school and eventually gaining admittance to the school. In particular, I had a client who came to us with what I would say mediocre academic background, and this is his quote. That's not his picture, but he doesn't actually look that far different from that. But in any case, he came to the school with fairly mediocre stats. He had not done well in the GMAT. He had been to a couple of schools, had a graduate degree, and he had done fine. He had done fine, in fact, probably better than fine. And his work experience had, as frequently we'll see, was somewhat jumpy. He had worked in a couple different countries for a couple of different companies, all for good reasons why he made these transitions, but still, they were there. What really turned schools on to him was he had a goal that was very specific. He wanted to do private equity work in the world of infrastructure, big projects, big government projects, bridges, highways, trains, the like. And amazingly, that is not something that most business schools actually have a lot of content around. They don't have electives on it. They really don't focus on it. Even schools that have private equity, this is quite its own niche right there. It turns out there is one European school that just a year ago got money in order to have their own professor specifically focused on infrastructure and private equity. And this was a school that he had never considered. And we worked together to find an appropriate school for him. And this just, landed on in all different ways. Allowed him to be in Europe, which was a consideration, and it had this focus on private equity and infrastructure. And because he was able to speak to his own desire to study private equity and infrastructure, he actually got the school very excited about him. They are really, in many ways, see him as the perfect complement to this professorship that they're creating. And really, they were able to say, God, this is somebody we want here. So despite his low GMAT score, despite his GPA, despite the fact he had a little bit of a choppy business background, they not only accepted him, and again, his GMAT was probably 30 or 40 points below average. They accepted him, but I just found out today, literally this morning, that he also got a 22,000 euro scholarship there. So he couldn't be happier, and he couldn't be happier not just because it's going to cost him less. He's going to be in an exotic city, but also he's going to be studying exactly what he wants to study for the next 2 years, and obviously laying the groundwork for just having a terrific career in this one very small piece of the private equity world.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a super story, Harold. Let me share another one around curriculum. And this guy, again, not his picture, but admitted to Kellogg. And yes, Kellogg is a top 10 program. And we want you to create your own top 10 list. But what's unique about this particular candidate is he came from a business background in terms of his undergrad education. And given the goals that he had moving forward, and his stats, which are a little bit softer than what you see in the 2-year full-time programs at the top 10 MBA programs, we encouraged him to consider the Kellogg 1-year program, which if you happen to have an undergrad degree in business, or perhaps you're a CPA, you can basically accelerate your MBA at Kellogg and do it in, I think it's about 14 calendar months, or maybe it's even 12, rather than the full 2 years, because you start in the spring and you go through the summer, and then you start you cram your whole first year basically into the summer, and then start your electives in the second year. So a great opportunity for him. He's super excited. He's going to take on less debt because he's going to a 1-year program, and at the end of the day, he's going to have an MBA from a top 10 school, where as a 2-year candidate, he would have been less competitive. So we're always looking for opportunities to find that right curriculum, because he didn't need to sit through accounting again and some of those classes he had already taken as an undergrad. And with that, we're going to transition to talking about clubs. Clubs is our C word here, but this also incorporates seminars, career treks, conferences, case competitions, all those things outside of the classroom learning experience, where you can, in real time, test what you're learning in the classroom. And some of that's around, leadership skills and organizational skills and negotiations, if you're perhaps orchestrating a big event for a club. And keep in mind that there are opportunities for you to test your leadership skills in clubs beyond the obvious consulting club or marketing club. There are interest clubs around wine and food, or various sports, and these are all great ways to develop your skills. And I'm going to share a story of a client I worked with last year, who had a background in the renewable energy space as an engineer, had spent a number of years working around the world on renewable energy projects as an engineer, and realized during this time that yes, our future needs to move to renewable energy in the energy space. But all the engineering in the world and problem solving is only as good as the money that can get behind it. So he wanted to go to business school to supplement his engineering background with finance so he could move into kind of the private equity space of investing in these innovative ideas that engineers are coming up with so that they can move forward and be implemented, figuring out what the business models would be. And he found a great program at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. They have great emphasis on sustainability, access to the Herb Institute, a great MAP program, which he's in right now, which is the last quarter of your first year, where you take everything that you learned in your first 3 terms and you work on a real world consulting project with 4 or 5 of your classmates, and it might be anywhere in the world. So clubs like that and activities like that are fantastic ways to identify schools that are right for you. And Harold's going to share a story about a client that he worked with.
That's right. Thank you, Susan. And this client also highlights the ability to talk about clubs or things that are happening outside of the campus in your application is just a wonderful way to say to the school, I've done my research. I like you not just because you're a top 10 or a top 20 school. I like you because you fit my needs, as well as there's a lot of value that I can bring to that community, because schools too, while their job is to provide you with value in an education, what they expect is that the community benefit from some of your own expertise and experiences. This is a woman, and this is the only time I've ever had this, who said to me, I want to leave Northern California. Never in my life. Most of our clients say they want to get to Northern California. She said she wants to leave Northern California, and it was all for all sorts of different reasons. So she came to us with a list of schools, and we ended up with a list of schools that really didn't look anything like the original. And the reason for that is she had some hiccups in her own background. Again, not a great GMAT. She'd been out of school quite a few years. Her work experience was in sales, not traditionally a place that business schools look at or draw from. So there were a few things to overcome. So what we first made sure happened is that she connected with various schools and really understood them, and really was focusing on those schools where she could make a real connection to, as well as bring some value. And on the personal level, she was very engaged with issues around the brain and mental illness, and she wanted to chart a career specifically in biotech, focusing on the brain. So the focus of what she wrote her application about was, again, these personal experiences, what she get from her education, but she also talked a lot about how she would get involved on campus. And she had known and she had learned about things, that there was a center for neurological disorders at another one of the schools at this big university. Also, that she would have the opportunity to do some volunteer work on a suicide hotline at that school. And that's something she had already been doing back in Northern California. And for her, it really allowed her to get to a place that not only in the classroom was she learning the things she wanted to learn, but also outside of the classroom. She was learning things about the brain and about mood disorders that she could not learn other places. And I think even more importantly, she was able to say, I'm going to go there. I'm going to become an expert in these issues around the brain, both inside the classroom, what I did for my summer internship, but she also made it clear this is information and that she wants to bring back to her classmates. She talked about how she wanted to take a leadership role in the healthcare conference in order to have it more focused on the brain. She really got engaged in many different ways. Again, not just in the classroom, but at clubs and in conferences and other things that were happening outside of the classroom. And at the end, happy story here, choosing between Owen and Olin, she got a scholarship to both. And she was pointed to those schools because they have great healthcare focused industries come there, alumni, and she ended up taking a job this past summer in Chicago working for a biotech firm, exactly what she wanted, focus on some treatments for brain disorders. So I think really a happy ending for her that only fell into place, first of all, getting a better sense of what her own needs were, as well as recognizing there's a lot of exciting things happening outside of the classroom that business schools were really excited when you talk about that.
All right. Thanks on that, Harold. And next up, community and culture.
Yeah. So this is all about finding that school that's the right fit for you. And in order to evaluate that, there are a few different things you should be looking at. First of all is simply location. And as I spoke about earlier, are you an urban person, a rural person, somewhere in the middle? Well, there are certain schools that you should know have these characteristics, and there's nothing to do about them. So do they really make your list? If you hate the city, does NYU make your top 10 list? Maybe not. At the same point, if your spouse, and this is my own experience, if your spouse has to be in a city to work while you're going to school, then a place like Tuck out in northern Vermont, northern New Hampshire rather, was not going to do the trick. So this is just one lens you have to look at as you think about your own top 10 list. And of course, there are things around just class size. Are you more comfortable going to a small school with 100 people, maybe University of Washington Foster? Or is Harvard ideal for you because you want a class of 1,000? There's also this issue about residential or non-residential. There are certain schools where everyone lives together in one community. University of Chicago Booth is a good example of that. You folks are together all the time. Or there's other places, Columbia is where people can live anywhere. So it doesn't have that same residential feel. What about the environment? Collaborative or competitive? Do you want to go to a school that's more like a cult? And I tease Susan that, for example, Duke, Fuqua is more than just a place that people get educated at. For them, it is truly a place to build their lives around. Or are you ready to go to a place where, in some ways, almost a more business-like relationship, where you come, you learn, and then you go back to your own community? And finally, there's this issue around diversity. Are you going to a place where you're simply going to be comfortable, that there's folks who are like you? And that just doesn't mean from an ethnic perspective. It also means from the perspective of geography. A lot of it is age. Are you going to be with super young folks if you're a little older, or older folks if you're a little bit younger? All of that is really determinative of your experience there, as well as just your ability to thrive there. And finally, we have this idea of, is it a jeans place or a khakis place? The reality is when you go there, knowing who you are, when you go there, you may quickly see this is your sort of place or this isn't your sort of place. I've never been a khaki Oxford sort of person, so I got to MIT, and basically I knew immediately this is the place for me. Seeing people in shorts and flip-flops and T-shirts, it's like, yes, this is where I'm going to be at home. And that really turned out to be the case.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Harold. I'm going to throw in one story before I get to the slides that we actually have. I worked with a client this past year. This is a rather unique thing that was completely independent of anything that was offered within the curriculum or the boundaries of the school itself. This individual is a Mormon guy who was still single at 27. And he explained to me that, as a Mormon guy at 27, his window of opportunity for finding a life partner was going to be closed by the time he graduated from business school. And it was really important for him to go to school in a geography where there was critical mass of eligible Mormon women. That made his list very different based on his competitiveness. And thrilled to say he's heading to Georgetown this fall, unless he gets off the wait list at University of Washington Foster. These are not programs that are in the top 10, but for him, based on background in healthcare, interest in being in a particular type of community, they were the right place for him. So with that, two quick stories, because I know we want to leave a little time for some Q&A at the end. Please do put some questions in. I saw one up there already. This is a story of a client kind of came to us on the older end. I want to say he was probably 35 and had softer stats, great work experience, and intended to stay in his same industry and function. And it had never occurred to him that he could attend an executive program where he would be with other people his age at the same point in their careers, rather than be surrounded by people who are, 6 to 8 years younger than him. He is at Booth now in their executive MBA program and loving it because he gets to rub shoulders with people on the C-suite level. A great outcome for him. he probably would not have gotten into a 2-year program because he was kind of out of the range in terms of years work experience, and the sort of goals he had didn't align with the career management resources at the top full-time programs for 2 years. Here's another example. This client came to us having applied 2 years in a row on her own. Her undergrad was in biology. She had very good stats, but her work experience was a little bit of a mismatch. She had worked in healthcare sales and financial sales and hadn't really been able to put her story together. Her passion, however, was in entertainment and media, which seemed completely disjointed from her background. But we were able to help her create a narrative around growing up as a child of immigrants in this country where media had helped her to learn the language and the culture. And she's someone who was constantly doodling in the margins of the notes she's taking at work. She ended up applying to NYU and UCLA, perhaps some other schools, and ended up getting a full ride with a Forte Fellowship at Anderson after 2 years of not doing anything, even getting accepted anywhere on her own. And she was also accepted to NYU. But given the resources that are available in the LA area for her goals in media and entertainment, she's heading out to LA this summer. So exciting outcome for her. And finally, Harold talked a lot about cost before, a little bit more here and some examples, and then we'll move along to some Q&A at the end.
Yeah, very quickly, because I know we're running out of time. One client came to us with an exceptional GMAT score. Other parts of his candidacy were not so good. So what we really helped him do is position himself to get a big scholarship based on our own knowledge of which schools are GMAT hungry, if you will. And GMAT is an important criteria for the different rankings. So with that in mind, his top 10 list was more a top 10 list of schools that he could get a full ride to, and success. At the end of the day, he ended up at a top 10 school, top 15 school, 100% scholarship, thrilled going to McKinsey this summer. I just have to build on, very quickly here what Susan talked about her Mormon client and his need to develop his own top 10 school list. I have a client that in some ways is similar, except he went to a Mormon school, an Indian guy, very interested in issues around spirituality and human resource development. It turns out Brigham Young University, the super large as well as super wealthy Mormon school, just loved him. They are very respectful of people of faith. They also loved his interest, very authentic interest in human resource development. So it ended up being that he got a full scholarship to Brigham Young University. I connected with him. He had never seen snow before, coming straight from India. Connected with him. He loves it. He loves the mountains, and just a real home run, not the least of which is because it's free. And of course, this was a school he never even heard about, let alone anticipate himself going there. So we have a lot more stories. Yeah, we have a lot more stories like this, but Susan, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so one other story here. This is a client I worked with 2 years ago who came to me and she'd done her undergrad on an athletic scholarship, outstanding stats, summa cum laude undergrad, 750 GMAT, which for an American woman is quite outstanding. But she said to me, Susan, I am really debt averse. She probably could have gotten into a school like Wharton, but it wasn't even on her top 10 list because she knew that she probably was not going to get a scholarship there. In the end, she wanted to transition from kind of a marketing role at a small regional bank in the South into an investment banking role. And she ended up at IU Kelley that has great resources around investment banking. And she ended up with full dean scholarship. So full ride, she's going to walk out this spring with no debt. She interned last summer with Bank of America Merrill Lynch. So great outcome for her. And again, came down to the cost and finding a school that would meet her needs and help her to achieve her goals. With that, Harold's going to kind of summarize how you can create your own top 10 list.
Yeah, that's right. So at the end of the day, there are top 10 lists according to the media, but there's also a top 10 list according to what your own needs are. And we talked about it in terms of competitiveness, how likely you are to get accepted, the connections you've already made there. Does the curriculum match your own needs? How about things that are happening outside of the classroom, like the clubs? Is it your people? Is it your type of community and culture? And finally, how important is it for you to get a scholarship? What is cost all about? Only by looking at all those criteria can you figure out your own top 10 list, not somebody else's. And then people will ask us, well, how many schools to apply to, how to think about this? Well, what we tell people is we like to see some combination of stretch, target, and likely. Stretch meaning schools like Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, which are a stretch for anybody. I don't care who you are. Targets meaning that you're at first glance, your different GMAT scores, GPAs, different metrics seems to make you a competitive candidate. And finally, the likely schools, schools that you're fairly confident based on your stats, as well as maybe other things that you know that you're likely to get into. And once you have a sense of what those schools are, then then you have to start strategizing. Meaning, is this going to be a 1-year process or a 2-year process? Will you be applying round 1 early decision some places, or round 2? It's not unusual for us to maybe have a client who first year round 1 applies to only their top 4 schools, their dream schools: Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, MIT, Haas, whatever it is. And then maybe by second round, once they get a better sense of these things, then they apply to other schools. Again, there's some strategizing around not just the schools that you feel will fit you best, the schools that are ranked highest, but also when and where to apply to. And that, for many of you, is going to take a little bit of time, energy, and effort to figure that out. And that's something that we know very well. So with that in mind, Susan, let me pass it off to you with the thought of saying a little bit more about us and taking some questions, hopefully.
Yeah. So how Stratus can help you. At the end of the day, admissions, MBA admissions applications are really complicated. There are lots of moving parts. There are tight schedules. There are nuanced decisions. This is not something you want to go at alone. With our team-based approach and our proven methodology, we have counselors who are there for you, to nurture you, to answer questions like, which one of my extracurricular activities should I list first? I've got these 2 great stories about leadership. Which one should I tell in the essay for this particular school? And our team, in working with our team, we can leverage the collective wisdom of 20 counselors or more and dozens of years of experience across different industries, across functions, so that you can put your best foot forward. So your next step is to learn what it would be like to work with Stratus. So you can contact us for a free 30-minute consultation. There are a couple ways to do that. You can email us your resume along with your target schools to consult@stratusadmissions.com, or you can visit our website /R1Success and fill out a consult form there. And if you schedule a consult with us by April 20th, Brendan Young, whose name you will see on some follow-up emails. Brendan Young is our Director of Candidate Strategy. He will put together a personalized discount for you if you schedule a consult by next week. And with that, we've got about 5 more minutes left. I'm going to leave up another quote and go off to questions. I know some of you have put up some questions while we have been talking, so I want to go to these. First question is, will we get this presentation deck? The answer is no, but we will send you a link to a recording of this. Our colleagues over at Beat the GMAT are recording this, and they will post it up on their YouTube channel for all to see in the future. So you can listen to it over and over again. And let's see, another question. I'm going to toss this one over to Harold, because it says, you mentioned that sales is not a typical discipline programs draw from. Is engineering a discipline they typically draw from?
Yes. Yes. Engineering is, in fact, and I don't have the numbers here, Susan, I love your thoughts here. Maybe it is the discipline that has the most applicants. It's certainly close. So the answer is yes, one would call engineering somewhat of an overrepresented industry in the application process.
Yeah, and I would absolutely agree with that. During my time at Duke, I read on the team that was responsible for identifying the best applicants out of India. And as you can imagine, I read a lot of applications from engineers. And I used to joke that we could probably fill the class multiple times over with just Indian engineers who had a 730 or 740 GMAT. It wouldn't be a very interesting class. People wouldn't learn a ton because part of the beauty of an MBA program is learning from your peers who come from different backgrounds. But engineers are definitely valued in MBA classrooms. So we have a couple of our counselors have backgrounds in engineering. So if you're interested in talking to one of them about your profile, please do reach out for a free consult. Another question is, how much time is advised for application to 5 schools? I'll take that only because a lot of clients who start with me at about this time in the year say to me, how many applications can I do in round 1? And I say, if you start now and you do, you put a whole strategy together in the next 2 months so that as soon as the applications are put live and the essay prompts are out, you can start writing essays. You do not want to be doing these just in August and September. I would start now. Again, do some introspection, put your school list together, make connections with people at different schools and really learn about them so that come May and June when those essay prompts are available, you can start writing and you can still take a summer vacation and get those applications submitted in round 1. If I remember correctly, at the beginning of this webinar, I asked if people had taken their standardized test yet. And at that time, and I know people joined us after that, there was no one who was done with their GMAT. And the individual asked the question about 5 schools, asked, can we start a consultation even if you're not going to do the GMAT until June? Absolutely. Get started on your introspection, understanding your why. Why do you want an MBA? Why do you want it now? Why do you want it at this particular list of schools? You can do that as a nice balance with the GMAT studying. And so in June, you take your GMAT, you know what your score is. Now you can have a better understanding of how competitive you would be at the different programs that you're looking at and maybe adjust your school list accordingly or think about retaking. So definitely reach out for a consult, even if you haven't taken that GMAT yet. Another question that we frequently get is, a lot of my friends and people in my office are also applying to business school. How can I make myself stand out? So if you're at an investment bank or a consulting firm, the person in the cube next to you is also applying to business school, and they probably have very similar work experience to yours. Great question. I'm going to pass it over to Harold for his response.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, and it really doesn't matter what industry you're coming out of or what your background is, there's always somebody else who looks like you. Only maybe they have a little bit of a better GMAT score. For that reason, everybody, and again, I don't care who it is, has to tell your unique story. How you went from where you are, why business school makes sense, to help the admissions committee understand just how you got here. What are you all about? And you want to be as specific as possible because at the end of the day, you have to tell a story that is very authentic, that it looks and sounds like nobody else's, that it's genuine, it comes from the right place, because this is a human process. You want the business schools to see you as a person and not just a set of scores. And the only way to do that effectively is by taking your time, understanding a lot about what you are, what your motivation is, and then being able to explain in a very unique way why an MBA makes sense for you, how it's an outgrowth of what you have done and what you want to do. And this takes time. You basically have to write a fairly sophisticated autobiography in some ways, and that takes time. Because at the end of the day, business schools, you cannot leave them guessing about why an MBA makes sense for you. You have to be able to explain that in the context of all you've done and, again, all that you hope to do.
Great. Thanks, Harold. I'll add one thing to that. I've sat in on a number of admissions panels with folks from a variety of different top MBA programs. I remember one admissions director saying, we have very active imaginations, and if you don't fill in the blanks for us and tell us the whole story, we'll make up something to fill in those blanks, and it is not necessarily what you want us to be thinking. So
Very good.
keep that in mind. Yeah. In any case, we are out of time here. I want to thank Harold for his time. I want to thank Beat the GMAT for hosting us today. And I want to thank all of you who have attended and listened in and asked questions. Please do reach out to us to ask for a consult. We'd be glad to talk to you about what your goals are, what your profile looks like. And we look forward to hearing from you. I wish you all a great rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you all.